Stay tuned. Bridges starts now.
Welcome to Bridges. I'm Monica Schmelter, and I'm so glad that you could join us today. For most of us, when it comes to grieving and loss, nobody would argue that the loss or the death of a child is just the worst kind of pain and grief. And yet sometimes how to respond to that, how to offer sympathy to somebody, we just don't know what the right things to say are. Well, my guest today has experienced the loss of a child, and she joins to share her story and also help us to understand from what she's learned how to best reach out and comfort others. I want to welcome you, Cindy, to the program today.
Thank you, Monica.
I'd like to, and I know you have a lot to share about what you learned through your experience of you and your husband losing your son, John Preston. But let's start, Cindy, a little bit with your story of losing your son and then the things that you've learned.
Well, my husband and I had been married for 12 years, and of those 12 years, we had tried to get pregnant for 10. We went through all sorts of tests and poking around and torture, and they finally decided that we had unexplained infertility, which is not very helpful.
No.
But there just is a point where they say everything seems normal, and we don't know why it's not working.
And that had to be
That was very hard.
brutal.
It was very brutal, and it was very hard, and it was very hard to adjust to. But after kind of getting the final word, about 9 years into our marriage, 10 years, we decided, okay, God has a different plan for us, and we're going to try to figure out what that plan is and try to follow it. And what we felt like was the plan was that we were going to help other children. We were going to help children whose parents couldn't or wouldn't provide for them, you know, try to get them the things that they needed, spend time with them. And we were able to do that with a couple of different families. And we really had accepted that, adjusted to it, and we were being productive with our, you know, our grief on not being able to have children. And then in June of 2008, I threw up one morning and thought that was odd. I was 39 at the time, so missing a cycle was not that odd for me.
Right.
And so I had missed a couple of cycles, but it didn't really, that was, like I said, it wasn't odd. So
You had been told that, you know, unexplained fertility, so
Right.
you just really weren't connecting dots.
It never crossed my mind until the day I threw up. And then kind of, I called my husband, and kind of as a joke, on a lark, I ran by Walgreens and got a test. And it was the cheapest test they had. And because I thought, I'm not going to waste $15 on something I know is going to come back negative. Well, it came back positive. And so
It had to be like unparalleled joy.
it was unparalleled joy and shock. And I mean, we went back to the store and bought the most expensive one and did it again to make
Just
sure.
to make sure.
And we were in a state of shock, but just we were blissfully shocked. And we went to the doctor, and we found out that I was 3 months pregnant.
Wow.
Which, of course, my doctor was a little bit like, are you kidding? Like, it never crossed my mind. It really never crossed my mind.
I mean, I can understand that given the difficulty in conceiving
Right.
and your age and at that time.
Everything, just every logical thing said there was no way that would happen.
Yeah.
And
So now you're 3 months pregnant.
I'm
the
3 months
doctor
pregnant.
says.
We got to have an ultrasound. We found out it was a boy. Everything looked great. Had a really strong heartbeat. When they told us it was a boy, I was like, all right. My husband was like, well, Cindy, what if it had been a girl? I said, I'd been fine, but I really have always wanted a boy. My husband's a dairy farmer. I thought, what cuter thing than to watch a little boy grow up with his dad on the farm.
I agree.
And so I was very thrilled it was a boy. A month later, we went back for my next checkup. Jim Ray was not able to go. He was out in the field planting corn. Heartbeat was great. Everything looked good. I got a picture. Got some more ultrasound pictures. Got to hear the heartbeat. I was supposed to have recorded the heartbeat, but I was so giddy over hearing it, I forgot to record it. So,
Are you telling people?
Oh, we've told everybody. I mean, starting 2 days after we found out, we started telling people, because you're at 12 weeks, which is the safe part.
Absolutely.
And we were actually, 12 and a half weeks. And so we were telling everybody. I took the ultrasound, drove around to all my friends' houses and surprised them.
And you have to kind of think, after years of trying and praying, that like God has answered your prayer.
Oh, absolutely. We were so thankful. I mean, we just, the back of my brain was constantly saying, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Just was, never ending thank you in my head. And so then on the 5th month, which was in August, we went and had our next ultrasound. And Jim Ray was able to go with me this time. So we got there and we went into the room and they did all the stuff. And then she did the Doppler to try to hear the heartbeat. And she could only hear my heartbeat, but she said that was normal. Sometimes you just had to really see it. And so she just said, okay, we'll go ahead and do an ultrasound. And she said, I know it's a boy, but we'll just confirm it for sure, for sure. And so we went in, and very quickly it got very quiet. And they were.
So you know something's wrong.
I knew something was wrong. I hadn't figured it out yet, but I was very apprehensive. And there were 2 nurses in there, which was kind of odd because usually there's just one. And one of them left, and then the other one left. And then one of them came back, and when she came back in, she patted my foot and looked at me. And I kind of went like this, and she shook her head no.
She shook her head no?
She shook her head no. And I turned around and looked at my husband, and I remember thinking, are they coming to take me somewhere in an ambulance because I hear a siren? It turned out that was me. I was wailing, and I didn't even realize that I was just wailing. And my husband was holding me, and he was crying, and I just kept saying no, you know, just over and over and over. I just kept saying no, 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 no. And then the doctor came in and said, she said, you've experienced a fetal demise, which I will say is not the greatest way for a doctor to tell you.
Not at all. I mean, I guess that's like technical or medical jargon, but I don't know, you know, as a mom and a dad hearing that, I'm sorry.
It was just so harsh.
Yeah.
And like you said, it was so medical and not care. To me, it didn't feel caring.
No.
Well, we didn't stay much longer after that. They obviously they experience this more often than I do. So there's a back door that they let you go out of, so you don't have to go back through the lobby and see all the pregnant women sitting there. And
but like, what do you do? Like, okay, they say that and they're taking you out the back door, but then like, what happens next? I mean,
you go home and she did tell us, she said, here's your options. You can either let the miscarriage happen naturally. And they felt like he'd been gone for 3 weeks. So I was at 20 weeks, but they felt like he had already passed about 17 weeks. So she said, you can either let it happen naturally, which obviously there's no telling how long that takes if he's already been gone this long. Or we can set you up and you can go through, we'll induce labor and you can go through labor delivery. And so she told us that and we kind of absorbed it a little bit, but she's like, I want you to go home, rest, think about it, talk to your family. So we left and we went home, and of course everybody knew we were going to hear our ultrasound, that we were finding out for sure if it was a boy, and so we had to drive by. I live next door to my mother-in-law, who is awesome, and so we drove by, and I was just so out of it on the way home. I didn't realize until we got there that my husband had been crying the whole way too. And he went in by himself to the house and told his mom, and when he came back out, he was nigh to hysterical. And so we drove back next door to our house and sat and talked, and the very first thing that I said was, I hear so many horror stories of marriages breaking up over the loss of a child.
yeah.
Miscarriage
Absolutely.
or a 29-year-old. I said, that horrifies me. And he said, we will not let that happen. We'll do whatever. We'll be closer because of this, and we will not let that happen. And
You do have an awesome husband.
I do have an incredible, I have been extremely blessed with such a loving, down-to-earth, giving husband. And I mean, we got each other through this mostly. So we decided we didn't want to wait. We didn't want to wait to see what happened. We wanted to go ahead and go through.
Yeah.
So we went, that was on a Thursday. We went back to the doctor's office Friday morning and talked to her and told her that that's what we wanted to do. And we asked, is there anything that we're supposed to know? And she said, well, I would suggest that you let the hospital take care of your child because he's going to look like a gray flat pancake. Which was almost as devastating as anything else.
So you're just being talked to like
It
in
was-
such an inhumane way. This is your baby. This is your son. And this is the prep that you get for
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
And so we decided that we would do that. So we actually got scheduled that same Friday night, went in, and they started the inducing. And sometime in the middle of the night, my sister drove up. She was there by 11 that night. And sometime in the middle of the night, she said about 2 o'clock, my husband was sound asleep, and he just stood up out of his chair wide awake and said, "I'm not throwing my baby away. I can't throw my son away." And so we immediately called the nurse, and I was kind of in and out of this, but I was pretty awake for this part. And we talked to her, and she said, "You don't have to do that. You can bury your son. You can cremate him. You can do. We'll call the funeral home. They'll come and get him. They'll prep him and everything." And so we said that's what we want to do.
Because this is one of the things that you share in the ministry that you're launching to help other women and families that are going through this, is that you have more options really than what you think.
Yeah, exactly.
And even though we want to act like miscarriage or the death of an infant is, like just sort of get over it, that there are options.
There are lots of options.
To grieving, and you all elected to bury your son.
Yeah. And we, but because of what our doctor told us, we decided we didn't want to see him. So when he was born, I was very out of it. I had a lot of pain, and so they'd been giving me the medicine, but my husband was there. But he stood up and held my hand. But my sister, who is also the most awesome person in the world, she stood there and she saw him. And not till later, but she did finally tell me he just looked like a very teeny pink baby. No gray, no flat, no pancake. And of course, ever since we found that out, we've always wished that we could have done things different.
Yeah. And a lot of parents do.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that we don't know what the options are. We don't know what to expect. And when a medical person says, "This is what I think you should do," many times we
don't know any
that.
difference.
Yeah,
exactly.
We don't know that we're allowed to ask questions or what we can do. And part of why I wanted to do this program with you is, to communicate to all of us that babies at whatever stage are real, live human beings.
Right.
And you had the right to be able to see and hold John Preston.
Right. And as time went on, and as we began working, realizing that we weren't the only people in the world, which was very important to know, that had been through this, and started meeting other people, that was great because it was supportive. But some of it was hard because we realized, like one of my best friends who's working with me on starting a new ministry, she was able to hold her baby. There is a great ministry called Now I'll Lay Me Down to Sleep, who comes and takes photos of stillborn babies, which a lot of people won't do. She was able to hold her and have pictures made of her with her family, with her other daughters, and she got pictures to take with her. And we had no idea that that was even an option.
And I know that some of you watching might think, "Oh, I don't know about all of that." Grief and dealing with grief and the loss of a child, the loss of anybody, it's very difficult. But if we can do it in a healthy way, and that's to acknowledge that life has happened and that life has passed. And that's why I wanted you to share your story. So you find that you have these options, and I know it was a whole process, and we've got just a little bit of time left. What are some things that you learned, Cindy, as people find out, that John Preston had passed? What are the kinds of things that people said to you, and how did you learn that maybe we could do this better?
I learned quickly that we could do a lot better, and looking back, I knew I could have done better with other friends who had lost before I lost. And I realized some of the things I had said were hurtful because some of the things people said to me were hurtful. And I believe that they think they're saying, I believe they think they're helping. I don't think they're consciously trying to hurt you.
No.
Some of the things that were the most hurtful, one person said, "Well, you never know, he might have been an invalid." Well, I don't care if my son has 2 heads and he's green. He was my son,
Absolutely.
and I wanted him.
That's right.
And that is not comforting.
No.
And it also says if he had been green and had 2 heads, that nobody else would have liked him.
Right. And that he wasn't worth living.
And that he wasn't worth living.
And that's not true as a believer in Christ. All life is valuable.
All life is valuable, and every child is beautiful, no matter
Amen.
what disabilities they have or challenges they have. Every child is beautiful. Another thing that a lot of people said was they tried to encourage my faith. You know, they never blatantly said, you know, if you'd had more faith, you'd have them. But they would say, you just got to keep on having faith. You got to really, you know, pray a lot. And what that said to me was, you didn't have enough faith, that you didn't have enough faith, so God took your baby, or you don't have enough faith, and that's why you haven't gotten pregnant again.
Yeah, and none of those things, not only are they not true, they're absolutely not helpful.
Exactly.
And what we're talking about really is grieving and how to reach out to people. And the best things to say are just, I'm sorry.
Right. The best thing to say, my rule is if you can't say if you don't know what to say, don't say anything at all.
Yeah.
A hug, a gift, or a service, or crying with me are the best gifts you can give.
Yeah, they are.
And they're the most helpful.
Because we can't fix everything,
No.
Cindy. You know, there are just things that are outside of that. And so what you're sharing is that just to say, I'm sorry, a hug, and leave it at that.
And even having been through it, I still, when one of my friends loses a child, I still don't know what to say. But I can sit there and I can cry with them and hold their hand and tell them that I love them. And they repeatedly ask me to come back over and do it again.
Yeah, because it's so helpful.
It's
Thank
the
you
most
for
helpful.
coming, for sharing your story. And
Thank you
the
for
things
letting
that
me
you've
share my story
learned.
of my son.
We'll have the information up on our website for you.
For more information on a guest, visit our website, ctntv.org.
Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Monica Speaks TV today.
If you're just joining us today on Bridges, we're talking about suffering, and my next guest suffered the loss of his mother at the hands of his father when he was just 14 years old. Ealum, I want to welcome you to the program today.
Thank you.
I'm so glad, and really I feel honored to meet you, Ealum, as I read your book and your story. You know, I think to be a boy of 14 years old and your father murders your mother, and you know, that's a lot. And to come to a place of forgiveness. Tell us a little bit, if you would, about your story and your family life.
Well, my father was always mean and abusive to my mother, my brother, my sister, and me. I remember when I was around 6 years old, my dad would make me walk around a coffee table, whoop me for no reason at all, just hear me cry. And then in the third grade, I didn't know how to spell tadpole, and every letter I missed, he whooped me across the back. And the police almost arrested him for child abuse, but the laws were more lenient south those days, so they let him go. Now, as time went on, we moved to Mount Clemens, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit.
I'm familiar.
Are you familiar
I was
with that?
born in Detroit, so I know right where Mount Clemens is.
Would you like for me to go into the morning that the accident happened?
Please, yes.
Or it wasn't an accident, it was
Right.
permanent. But on May the 2nd, 1973, I was 14 years old. And my father had agreed with my mother to stay in the basement that night because my mother decided to get a divorce from him. He comes up to my mother's bedroom about 4 or 5 in the morning. He tried to smother her, and like he had done before, and she
So
yelled.
you had tried that before?
He had done that before because he's very abusive, and so he tried to smother my mother, and my mother yelled, and my brother and I, we ran in. Then he took a baseball bat and busted my mother over the upper face and over the body, and then he busted my head open and ran me downstairs and trapped me in the kitchen corner, and my head was already gushing blood at this time, and my father was trying to kill me even then. I put my arms up to protect my head, and my arms suffered from it, but we ran out of the house, my brother and I, and because Dad wouldn't let us call for police in the house, so we ran out of the house, and my brother said that Dad would kill Mom, and I said, no, he won't. So she came through everything else, and I knew she would come through this too, or at least that's what I was thinking at 14. But we ran up the road, and the police wound up coming because the people wouldn't let us in their house at 4 and 5 in the morning, all bleeding. You can see why.
So they probably don't know what's going on,
Right.
but somebody calls the police.
Yeah.
So the police come.
They put me on one side of my dad and put my brother on the other side. And we drove a little piece, like we're going to the hospital, and my dad said that he loved us. And my brother said, Dad, if you loved us, then why'd you do this for? And my dad said he wanted to save us from hell. Well, at 14, I didn't know the love of God. And I said, if he goes to heaven, I'd go to hell. I was very bitter about it. But I didn't think Mom died. I went up to the road, and they wound up sewing our heads up at the hospital. Then there were 2 nuns came out of the hospital and started talking about how good my mother was, good woman my mother was. And my mother was a Christian, and she tried to live her life by the golden rule. But they started talking about how good a woman my mother was. And I asked, was Mom alive? And my brother, because I wanted to prove my brother wrong, they kept talking. Then I asked again, is Mom alive? They said, no, she isn't. They said, do you want to go see her? I remember what went through my mind as I saw my mom on that table with a white sheet over her, as they pulled it back and saw her all bruised and her body bad shape. I remember what went through my mind was, Mom, wake up, let's go home. But Mom didn't wake up, and I didn't go home. About 12 o'clock, the state of Michigan came and got us, and came an orphan from the state of Michigan. My grandparents came up the next day and got us, and took on the responsibility of raising 5 children from the age range 9 to 16. I think now what a load they really took on.
Yeah. But they love you, and, they wanted to do that. So what you've just described is really a horrific childhood, you know, to have an abusive dad. Even though your mom loves the Lord, she's trying to do the best she can, but what you're saying is you were all repeatedly beaten and abused, and you thought your mom would come through this episode too.
Yes, I did.
But she didn't. She passes away, grandparents take you in, which is a blessing, but yet that's so much to deal with, and you've come to a place of forgiveness for your father, and so have some of the siblings. And I would love to hear about that process, because so many of us, you know, when we suffer and when we have pain and trauma in our lives, it's difficult to forgive, if not impossible, in our own strength. And yet, as I read your book, Ealum, it was clear to me that you had come to a place of true forgiveness.
Well, what happened is when I became a Christian when I was 16, I remember when the love of God came into my life. I said, God, let me live to tell my dad I love him, forgive him, because the hardest thing for me to do was to forgive my dad, because I hate him so much, was just rolling off my mouth, let me live to see him and tell him that I love him, forgive him. Well, I forgot about that prayer, and in my early 30s, I had a dream that I went to see him, and I got mad at God and said, God, why, after all these years, would I have a dream like this? Yeah. And then I repented later on in the day at work to God how I reacted to it. But then I talked to a guy about it at work. And I worked for the Church of God Publishing House in Cleveland at that time. And so I talked to him. And for the first time since I was a very small child, I felt a love for my father. Mm-hmm. And the thought came to my mind to go see him. And I said, God, no way. There's just too hard. I said,
and when you
no
say to go see him, I'm thinking your dad was in prison.
My dad was in prison, yeah. And so over the space of the following 3 years, I kept having dreams that I went to see him. And I talked these dreams over with people that I worked with. And I asked them, could this be the devil trying to bother me? And they said, no. They said they believe God's trying to deal with me to go show my dad I love him and forgive him. So after the final dream, I wrote a letter about 4 or 5 in the morning to my dad wanting to see him, and he wrote me back and let me know he wanted to see me too. So on May the 4th, 1996, 23 years and 2 days after the death of my mother, I walked into Michigan State Prison there in Lansing, and no, he's in Jackson. We had to go to Lansing for it. But and let him know I love him and forgive him. If you'd have told me I'd done that at 16, I said, there's no way. But God works in the process of time. Mm-hmm. He's helped me, and I know he's going to help other people, too.
Yeah, I mean, because what you're talking about, because we're hearing about this story, obviously, quickly in the scope of an interview. But years, you know, at 16, if we would have asked you, Ealum, you're saying if you could forgive your dad, you'd say no way. But yet in your 30s, God worked with you. He gave you these dreams to go visit your dad in prison. I am wondering, how did your father respond to the words, I love you, Dad, I forgive you?
Well, my dad really accepted. My dad said that the reason why he was in prison is because he didn't listen to the voice of God. God kept dealing with him. My mother begged him to live for God, and he wouldn't do it. His mother was a godly woman. He came from a godly background, and she told me before she died of cancer in 1961 or 60 or something that, Jimmy, if you don't give your heart to the Lord, son, something's going to happen in your marriage. And my dad just didn't listen, and he had a warning about a week before this that something's going to happen in his family. He just wouldn't listen. He just went on his own way, drunk. He cheated on Mom, and but according to the Scripture, we all sinned and we all fell short of the glory of God. So God forgives him too, and he did forgive him.
Yeah.
My dad let me know he was a Christian.
So your dad did become a Christian, obviously while he's in prison.
Say that again.
While your dad is in prison, he gives his heart
Yeah.
to the Lord. But those seeds had been sown through his godly mother, your mom praying for him. How about your other siblings? How do they respond, Ealum, to you being able to know the love of God and love and forgive your father for murdering your mother?
Well, when I got back to Tennessee after the first visit, I thought, was there something I could do more for my dad to show him that I love him? I got with my brother, and we made a pretty neat arrangement for him to come back to Tennessee when he died. And I also planned to speak a eulogy over him. And I wrote it. My brother thought that it'd be good for him to see it before he died, so I sent it to him. One of my dad's last requests was for him and his children to enter the house of God one more time. So on August the 13th, 2003, my dad went to be the Lord, and his children into the house of God with him. We all have forgiven him to the best of our ability, and it's my understanding that most all of us have made the trip to Michigan, let him know we love him and forgive him. But that's because we know our mother would want us to do that.
Yes.
And we know God wants us to do that.
And God gave you the strength to do that. And I'm thinking, Ealum, Ealum, of course, Ealum Mcdonald outlines this in detail in the book that he wrote. And I would recommend you to get the book and to read it, because it is a story of miraculous forgiveness and God's healing power. We've got just a minute left. I know there are people that are watching, Ealum, that have something similar or something traumatic, and they feel like they can't forgive. Maybe you could speak to that for just a moment.
Well, some of you guys will never have to go the length that I went through. I remember asking the Lord after I served him since I was youth and stuff, I asked him to let me love him more. And this was laid up on my heart to do. But just take it one step at a time. Ask God to forgive you, and ask him to help you to forgive others. And just take it one day at a time and walk in forgiveness. If you'd have told me, like I said earlier, that I would have done that in my 30s, I said there's no way. But like I said, God works in the process of time. He's going to help other people in the process of time, too.
That's right. Thank you so much for coming today and for sharing your story.
Thank you.
It's been good to have you. We are almost out of time, so we've got to go, but we say goodbye and God bless you.
If you would like to purchase a copy of today's show for $15, you can send a check to the address on your screen or call us at 615-754-0039. Be sure to mention the program number on the screen. If you would like to contact WHTN, you can write to the address on the screen or call us at 615-754-0039 or visit us on the web at www.ctntv.org. Thanks for watching Bridges.